Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. Y'all, I'm thinking I should give up on reading horror novels. I haven't read a lot of them, but I should like them. Horror movies are one of my favorite genre of movies. Horror shows are fun. Horror books? I certainly like a certain kind of horror novels. The ones that are more paranormal, emotional, and atmospheric. Basically, I like ghost stories. But I think I might need to acknowledge that other kinds of horror books just don't do it for me. So, Into the Drowning Deep is a book about mermaids, but scary mermaids. If you remember the mermaid mockumentary that Animal Planet made about a decade ago, the premise is clearly inspired by that. A television network that produces mostly bad science fiction sets out to make a documentary about a scientific search for real mermaids in the Mariana Trench. The problem is they found something, and that something killed them all. Of course, no one believes the footage released of sea creatures that look eerily human swarming over the decks and eating people alive. Years later, another voyage sets out to prove that the mermaids were real. The network was not at fault, and the people lost in the voyage really had been eaten by a monster humanity had forgotten in all forms but legend. So you might have gotten from my intro, I didn't really love this book as much as I had hoped. And that drives me nuts because I love this premise. Hell, one of the reasons I was so excited to pick this one up is because I am working on a book that has some similarities. Now, I'm very early on in the process, like I'm literally just mapping out the outline at this point, but it is based on the premise of mer-like creatures who are inherent enemies to humanity. Now, that is actually really objectively nothing much like this book. Mine is going to be a clear fantasy, not horror, and as this book repeatedly reminded us, this one is not about mermaids who are enemies to humanity. They're about mermaids that are predators of humanity. And that gets me to the first problem I had with this book. This book is hella overwritten. You know the way that during exposition, authors often try to squeeze far too much description and explanation into each sentence, like far more than it can handle? So instead of getting sentences like, Olivia walked to the phone, we get sentences like, Olivia, wearing her signature white, but smeared with blood, still shaking from the recent loss of her friend, walked to the phone on the dark wall, past the scientific equipment she vaguely understood from her years of reading up on tech before interviewing scientists and science fiction nerds for her job as a reporter with Imagine. This book read like that, straight through. Even in the last few chapters of the book, we are still getting action interrupted to get more character backstory. Sentences are still clustered with clauses building the setting and the world. The author is still throwing in entire paragraphs in parentheses, which, by the way, is like one of the weirdest stylistic choices I have ever seen in a book. Like, it's already set off from the rest of the text. It's in its own separate paragraph. It doesn't also need to be in parentheses to tell the reader that it is only tangentially related. But that was a tangent. Things, in my opinion, also often were stated very clearly when they should have just been implied and left to the reader to solidify. And they're stated outright over and over again. And I don't just mean that the author does this with multiple different details. I mean that she states the same detail dozens of times. Like, we don't just get that Ray is Olivia's protector stated once. No, it's every single time that Ray comes into the scene, there's a little bit more about the fact that Ray is her protector and how he became her protector and why he's her protector and how he works as her protector. Even long after that should have been solidified, we're still hearing about it over and over and over again. But I'm beginning to feel that that's part and parcel with the genre of horror. In horror, you sort of have to maintain that sense of terror, pain, and disgust, and that often means drawing your reader's attention to the same creepy details over and over and over again. You can't just set up that Tori feels she's on a ship of ghosts and let it go. You have to keep reminding the readers of the elements of the ship that feel like a ghost story. You have to keep pointing out the dark corners, and you have to keep pointing out the memory of her sister that she sees everywhere she goes. all so that the reader never loses that sense of pain and foreboding. You can't just have Dr. Toth notice the monstrous beauty of the creatures. No, we have to have every character notice their weirdly beautiful and pouty lips, their needle-like teeth, their inhumanly long hands, their eel-like tail, etc. Because otherwise, the reader might lose that sense of alien danger watching them throughout the entire thing. And in the end, it just drove me nuts. I kept being like, I know the ship is doomed. You don't have to keep telling me. The foreshadowing in this book felt like being hit with a fucking 10-ton mallet. It didn't help that the book starts with over 20 pages of prologue in the form of diegetic texts about the first tragically lost mission. We get to read news reports about the lost ship. We get to see Tori finding out her sister was lost on the voyage. We get to see transcripts from Dr. Toth's lectures about mermaids, as well as description of the video recording that was recovered from the first voyage. We see another ship swarmed by mermaids, and we read quotes from all the different characters, and all of it is full to the brim with statements about man's hubris, humanity destroying itself with its constant quest for advancement, and the threat of the sea. It's like, I get it. I get that people are going to be eaten by mermaids. I knew that before I picked up the damn book. That's why I picked up the damn book. And in movies, none of this would be a problem. Because in movies, all that could and would be in the background. You wouldn't have to get a constant running description of how threateningly dark the water is. You would just get to see the dark water looming in the background of every scene. Movies don't have the equivalent of 10 hours worth of dialogue shoved in, so they only have time to drop foreboding comments maybe a dozen times. And because I don't read a lot of horror, it's hard for me to judge whether this redundancy is worse than what I'd find in normal horror novels, or if it's just part and parcel of the genre. It felt egregious to me, but I had the exact same response to the Watchers, like almost to the word the exact same response, which is the only other horror novel I've read recently. Another thing that I suspect is just another part of the horror novel genre, but really annoyed me, was the maddeningly irrational motivations of the characters at moments. So I used to have a friend that I would watch a lot of vaguely horror-related things with, and he had this constant running commentary on the fact that the characters were acting irrationally. And I was always like, yeah, but they're terrified. People act irrationally when they're terrified. People run upstairs when they should run out the door. People hide under the bed instead of fighting back with a baseball bat. People scream and freeze instead of running away. But the qualification there that makes the irrational motivations and irrational actions make sense is the high-stress moment. People act irrationally when they're terrified. This book has like 300 pages where stress levels are relatively low. Certainly low enough that people should be fucking thinking about what they're doing. To make it worse, the author draws attention to the fact that for the majority of the book, the majority of the scientists on board this ship never really accept they're in danger. And yet they are still acting like absolute fucking morons. I get that the book is trying to draw an idea or establish an idea that scientists often seem to act counter to self-preservation when pursuing knowledge, but I do not buy that a group of intelligent people can be told that 2 of their numbers have been killed in the last 24 hours, and they still don't even lock the doors to their damn labs? Nobody seems to suggest turning the ship around and just leaving? I don't buy Tori's extreme need to leave the wet lab when she already knows the ship is under attack. I don't buy why Daryl and Gregory insist on staying out on deck away from all the cover. I don't buy Haley's flip-flopping motivation as to how she interacts with the monsters. And most of all, I do not buy that the captain, crew, Theo, all the people who knew what was happening never decided to just nope the fuck out of there when they knew that the defensive system was compromised and they were under attack. Like, I understand their job said they weren't supposed to, but if you give people the weight of job versus life, most people are going to choose surviving to apply for another job. And on that note, I don't understand Theo's motivation at all. Like, I do not know why he was doing the majority of what he was doing. The book sets him up initially as a very clear corporate villain. Like, that is the character trait we're given for him in the beginning. And then we get enough backstory that we're supposed to, like, build some empathy for him, but also question his motivations a little bit. Like, oh, do we believe he's kind? Do we believe he's cruel? Has he lost his way? Has he given into the corporate cruelty? Like, I don't know. And at the end of the book, I'm still not sure what the hell was happening. Was he just super devoted to his bosses for some unknown reason? Or was this all about his wife and trying to help her fulfill her dreams? Or was he trying to get her killed because he doesn't love her anymore? Or was he trying to excuse their guilt? Which, that one I'm really not sure about, because I'm not sure if he was actually involved in the first voyage, or if it was just his wife that was involved in the first doomed voyage. I'm still not sure if he was really a conservationist, or if he was doing something else on that whaling ship. Like, I don't know what the fuck Theo was doing, or why. And I feel like I should know. At the very least, the epilogue should have given me some information about why he did the things he did, but instead it focused primarily on characters who we already knew exactly what their motivations were. And I mean, I am happy that we get a confirmation that the couple is still a happy couple, at least vaguely, by the end. But honestly, I would have preferred to know about some of the million other characters whose state of mind were very much in question last time I saw them. So yeah, this book also, by the way, has just about a million POV characters. We get Tori, Dr. Toth, Olivia, Haley, Holly, Heather, Daniel, Theo, Daryl, Gregory, Jacques and Michi, Jason and Louise. We get bits of POV section from the Siren's point of view. We get points of POV from Dolphin's POV. And it's all the same voice. Like, yeah, the thoughts we read in each section for each character are different, but the distance we have from reader to character is exactly the same. Each focuses on the same theme, we get the same amount of detail, the same kinds of history, the same sentence structure and vocabulary. We have this really huge cast that all feels the same. I occasionally forgot whose POV I was even in and had to flip back a couple of pages to check. Almost everyone was equally arrogant. Everyone was equally sure they were in the right at all times. Everyone was obsessed with their name making a mark on history. Everyone was weirdly willing to share intimate details with absolute strangers the second they meet. And this is a pretty diverse cast to all think and act so similarly. Holly and Heather are deaf. Michi is a Japanese-Australian hunter. Jacques is a French-Canadian asshole. Dr. Toth was a half-native Hawaiian. We can assume from his name that Louise was meant to be Latino, though it's never directly stated. Olivia was autistic. But of all of them, the only ones who read as distinctly different are Olivia, who reads as childish and in need of protection, and the two hunters, who are absolutely detestable. The only way I was able to tolerate their POV sections at all was because they were possibly the most doomed of the doomed characters on the damn doomed boat. Like, their death was foreshadowed the moment I met them. I knew they were going to die, and that's the only reason I could tolerate reading their voices. And after all that, the ending felt incomplete. I think partially because we only really got resolution for a couple of the dozen or so surviving characters. Like, we didn't even get and they published their research, but it never brought the dead back to life kind of resolution. And that's another thing that I think would not have been a serious problem if this were a movie instead of a book, where one panning shot of survivors stepping off the boat looking all, like, traumatized would have given us everything we needed for a resolution for them. Then again, the book also makes this really big point about how these are world-altering series of events and discoveries, and we get none of how the world is altered in the epilogue. Like, I wanted some sign of how this would actively change humanity's interaction with the oceans, with each other. Like, what effect was this going to have? And on one last note, this book has one more problem that bothered me significantly more than it should have. Like, this is a petty-ass thing, but it drove me nuts. This book was written as near-future sci-fi, as in it was published in 2017, and the majority of the events take place in 2020. And the author made some predictions about where tech and science would be by that point that honestly should have been fair guesses, but they were wrong. There are some medical advancements in self-driving cars, and things like that that we are very close to, and I'm willing to just sort of ignore even though it took me out of things for a minute. Because hopefully by the next couple of years this will no longer be incorrect. But weirdly, the one that bothered me the most was the author predicted that the axolotl would be extinct in the wild by 2020, and as of 2023, they aren't. And that's a stupid little thing, but it took me entirely out of the book, and made me wonder why the author bothered setting it in the future in the first place when she ran the risk of her predictions being wrong. And at least like the medical tech, it's explained away. It's part of the world here, because imagine this fake production company is directly responsible for the development of these medical advancements. So I accept that it's just part of an alternative world. But that further makes me wonder, why set it in a future when you could have just set it in an alternative version of our world? Overall, I don't know, you guys. This one just annoyed me more than it should have. It's not a bad book. It's got a lot of creepy imagery, a cool premise, some likable enough characters, and some characters I was happy to read that they were dead. The writing is overwritten, yes, but not to the point of being unreadable. Honestly, it's less overwritten than, say, Anne Rice, who I do like. The science language isn't too obtuse, nor was it so oversimplified that it felt unrealistic. It had enough foreshadowing that nothing really took me by surprise, but I don't think it always has to. Like, we all start the play Oedipus already knowing that he's going to kill his father and marry his mother. And we know this clearly by the end of Act 1. It is stated in text. But we still watch the entire play till the end to watch the tragedy unfold. And this book is a lot like that. We know exactly what the tragedy will be. The only question is how bad it will be. And that's fine. Some of the survivors were actually a surprise to me, but in the end, that just wasn't enough to draw me in. I never got emotionally attached to any of the characters, and for me, that is a death knell for a book. So yeah, I did not love this one. But I think that someone else, someone who reads more horror, who likes intensely detailed writing, and for whom character isn't a deal breaker, might love it. But overall, I think it's time for me to just accept that when I read about a cool horror book, maybe I should just wait a few years for Hollywood to fuck it up and watch the movie instead.